All right, so I'm in a series right now that I'm talking about our priorities, because priorities are one of those things that can kind of slip off our radar. And last week I talked a lot about, hey, my number one priority is God. But there are times that you can look at my life and see you're not really living like your number one priority is God. You're living like your number one priority is your own pleasure or your work or your hobby because the question is where you spend your time, your money, and your thoughts. That's your priority. If you examine that, open up your bank statement or your check register, look where your money goes. The Bible says, where your treasure is, there is your heart. Okay, very easily we can identify where our hearts are by where our money goes. But the same is also true of where do we spend our time and what do we spend our thoughts on. So as we examine that, we can say our priorities are one thing, but the truth of the matter is those often shift without us really realizing it. Chaz, you wore my voice this morning. Shame on you. That was good worship today. That was good music. I shared with you a quote last week from Andy Stanley, and it's very important to this series. I think it kind of encapsulates a lot of what this series is, which is we don't drift in good directions. We discipline and prioritize ourselves there. And I know I've frequently said, you're either growing or dying. Any aspect of your life, any area of your life you can look at, you're going to either be increasing or decreasing. If you think you're staying the same, if you think you're on an even keel, well, my spiritual life really hasn't grown lately, but I'm not going down either. I'm just kind of coasting. I can tell you right now, you're not. You're going down. Anytime you think you're going level, you're dropping. So there really is no neutral. Now, early on in me and Tiffany's relationship, this was back in, I think, 1998, I started playing a video game called Ultima Online. And I love this game. It was one of those open worlds, and it was very immersive, and they had, monsters and people you could fight, and they had this really incredible trading system, barter system. And I loved this game. I played this game all the time. I would play this game like 6 to 8 hours a day, and that was on top of working 40 hours a week and being married and having, during that time, 1 to 2 kids, because I played it for 8 years. Now think about that. 8 years I played this game, 6 to 8 hours a day, and that's 7 days a week. That's not a 5-day work week. That's 7 days a week. I played this game, and I loved it, and it was great, and it was a lot of fun. And I was really good at it. I played on the veteran shard, which is, there was different servers. This was a server that the veteran players, the best players, went to. I played that on that one. And it was very, very difficult. There was a lot. You had no, like some of the other ones, if you didn't want to play against other players, because there are frankly players that could annihilate you in seconds, and then they would take all your stuff, and it was incredibly frustrating. This was like the server that was the worst for that. Also, when you killed monsters, you got like a third of the treasure. It was very, very dry when it came. So my point being, it was a very difficult server to play on. It was the most difficult one that they had. You got hardcore nightmare modes. That's kind of what this shard was. It was very, very difficult. And I played it, and I played it well. And I got myself to the point, one of the things I really enjoyed was trading. I liked being a merchant, And I figured out a system, right, that worked and worked really well. And I had like millions and millions of gold, which is what the currency was there, which was almost unheard of. I guarantee you, I was definitely, I don't know if I'd say I was the richest, but I was one of the richest players on this veteran shard. That's amazing, isn't it? And at its heyday, it was 250,000 people playing. So, we're talking about, I was elite, right? Are you guys with me? Is that awesome or what? From a video game standpoint, yeah, I was incredible. Now keep in mind, my wife was really about ready to beat me. She would say, because she would walk in the room and I'm always at the computer. And she's like, I'm so sick of looking at the back of your head. It was all she could do, not just to walk up and punch me in the back of the head constantly, because she was so angry because I wasn't paying attention to her. I wasn't paying attention to my kids. I wasn't taking care of things that needed to be taken care of. But hey, I was really important in this game. Woo! It was so destructive and hurtful to my relationships. And so if you look at my priorities, oh my gosh, and it's honestly, it's kind of embarrassing. 8 years of my life, what was my number one priority? It wasn't my wife. It wasn't my work. It wasn't my relationship with God. It wasn't my kids. It was a game. My number one priority in life was a game. And I kind of woke up one day because, I've always had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm looking at this game, and I'm kind of patting myself on the back, and I'm feeling incredible and amazing, because that's often what our other priorities do. They give us this sense of accomplishment, or this sense of being complete, or this sense of being useful. Or, those are the kind of things that really do rank high in our priority list. And that did it for me. This gave purpose to my life, this game. And so I hit the point, on this veteran shard where, I was one of the best of the best of the best, and I was like amazing and incredible and pat myself on the back. And I had a realization that my life was wasting. I wasn't accomplishing anything really outside of the game. Now I had a job, and I would go and I'd do my time, and that would give me money to pay my bills. But I wasn't really doing anything with my life. And so as I'm looking at myself as one of the best, of 250,000 people, I'm probably in the top 1 or 2% of these players. I'm incredible. I'm amazing. And the question came to me, this isn't real. And what can I do to make it real? Meaning this sense of purpose, not the game. I realized my priorities were out of whack. And at the highest point of playing this game, when I was on the peak, when I was on the top, I recognized how empty it was. Plus, my wife was fed up and constantly hassling me, and it was miserable. I mean, there was nothing outside of the game in my life that was really good. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." I shared that last week. I also shared this one with you, Luke 12, verses 29 and 31. Luke 12:29, which says, "And do not seek what you are to eat, what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows what you need, that you need them. Instead, seek His kingdom, and these things will be added to you." Now, during that time of my life, I wasn't a Christian. I didn't go to church. I really wanted nothing to do with God at that time. That's a whole other story. And that was probably one of the reasons my priorities were so out of whack. I didn't have, like right now, I understand my number one priority is God. My wife's number 2. And then come my children. Then I have other relationships, and then I have work, and everything else kind of filters down after that. But I understand that God is supposed to be my number one priority, and so I have to check that. Me and my wife had a discussion last night about it. If you're with your best friend or your significant other or your spouse, and you're looking for them to complete you, you're setting them up to fail. God is your provider, not your spouse, not your best friend. Not your boss, not a coworker. God, He's your provider. He'll give you everything that you need. And so whenever you have that, you have Him in that place of priority, that's where you constantly turn. But I don't know, He kind of slips out of that position, not by His fault, but by ours. We bring other things up into that. And there are times, married couples and friends, and that we put other people in that position of trying to provide for the things that we need, and that is not the right priority, and we get off course. Too many of us go through life allowing the world to set our priorities. Well, my wife really wants this nice house, which means I got to go work this job, which means I'm going to have to take abuse from these people because they're real jerks and they don't like me. So I'm just going to have a miserable life and I have no options. I have to do these things. But here's the thing. That, honestly, I think a lot of that is from the devil. I think a lot of that are lies from the pit of hell. You don't have a choice. You have to do these things. Because the truth is, you always have a choice. I mentioned last week, that to say I don't have time really is a lie. We all have time. Everybody has the same number of minutes, seconds, and hours in the day. So when somebody comes to you and they're doing something, they say, hey, you should do this with me. Well, I don't have time. No, you do. You have the exact same amount of time as everybody else. The question is, what do you prioritize for that time? And now here's the thing is we need to be honest. And I've gotten my life overbooked so many times, and I've got to kind of sit back and go, I need to pick my priorities, because my priorities I'm going to spend more time on. So instead of letting the world choose or letting my circumstances kind of force me into, I make those choices myself. I mean, I have to deal with that at work. I heard a person saying one time that at work that I was a really good employee, and that surprised them because I was a pastor. And I was like, what? That doesn't make sense. I mean, you would think that the Spirit, well, they should anyway, the people that are pursuing Christ and loving the world and loving God, those really, hopefully, are your better employees. But she said, no, because the problem is a lot of pastors, it just isn't their priority. Their priority is the church. Their priority is ministry. So when they show up to do a job, their heart's really not in it. And I can attest to that. I mean, I have that sense. I go spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week doing office administration work, and that's not my passion. And there's days it's kind of hard to go to work. But the point is, I have opportunities in that. And there's scriptures like, do everything that you do as if unto the Lord. I mean, in a sense, my work becomes my worship of God. And it really does. Because other people around me, when they look at me, I had a friend of mine ask me about a person, and she knew she didn't like this person, and she knew I didn't have a good relationship with this person. So she asked me one day, she's like, tell me, what do you think of this person? And I came up with something like, well, they have a couple of good priorities that I see, and I said something positive, and she's like, you won't say anything bad about anybody, will you? I try not to, because really there is good in everybody, and if we dwell on the negative, we dwell on the bads, honestly, it makes it hard to minister to them. It makes it hard to love them. And my hope is that I will get opportunities to love on and minister to people. Why? Because that's my priority. So when I go to my workplace, instead of sitting there with a negative attitude, and there are days it's difficult, I try to have a positive attitude. I try to smile. I try to treat my coworkers well, even coworkers that don't treat me well, so that people can see that as a form of my worship, because God is my number one priority. It's not that I don't have these other things. Me and my wife like having a big house. We do. We like to entertain. We have a gaggle of kids. We bring people over all the time. But you know what? That big house, it's kind of expensive. And we pay higher utilities because we got more cubic feet that we're heating and cooling. But you know what? We make that a priority so that we can do these other things. So I'm not a victim. I don't sit there when the $400 or $500 electric bill comes in, because sometimes in the summer it hits that, and go, oh, I'm in financial bondage. No, I picked that. Sometimes we do pick financial bondage. That's another sermon. I'm not going to get into it, but we do. We kind of pick these things and prioritize what's important to us. Let me keep moving here. So we set our priorities purposely. That idea or concept that we don't have a choice, that's an illusion. That's not true. We always have a choice. Sometimes it is the lesser of evils, or it's, sometimes but we need to be conscientious of we make those choices. I'm a big guy, I got extra layers of happiness and joy inside me, okay? Yeah, well, the reason is because I like sweets and I enjoy eating, and honestly, I recognize that's my choice. I don't have a issue, I don't have a health problem, I like eating good food, and I like eating a lot of it. And I need to recognize that because of that, I may deal with some consequences, like I may get out of breath when I tie my shoe. But I'm not a victim. That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not a victim. I make my own choices. Let's read Luke 10. Luke 10, starting in verse 38, going through 42. Luke 10. Luke 10:38 says, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. She went to him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.'" I shared this scripture with you last week, but it's really key. I mean, this is a beautiful example of we're choosing our priorities. Now, I have a hunch Martha didn't feel like she was choosing a priority. I think she felt like Jesus is here, and we have to take care of him. And obviously, Mary's not doing it, so if she's not doing it, I have to. I don't have a choice. And she felt very righteous in that, too. She even tell Mary to get up. She needs to help me with this. Because we put ourselves in that place, don't we? You know, one of the things in ministry that I have really enjoyed is recognizing how little God actually needs me. Because he doesn't. And I've had opportunities where I'm like, I don't know what to say and I don't know what to do. And I say a little prayer, God, you do this. Am I being lazy, slacking off? No. Because the worst thing I could do if I don't know what to do is jump in and do something because it might cause harm. I'm content. I know that God's got this. Most of the time. There are times that I stress, but I try to be Mary more than Martha. I try to, relationships, when you're looking at priorities and you read through Ecclesiastes seems like a really depressing book, but it's one of my favorites. Because Ecclesiastes, which is usually accredited to Solomon, who, the dude had 1,000 women and more money than anybody, and he had everything. And the author of Ecclesiastes basically says, I have everything, and it doesn't mean anything. That's in this virtual world of Ultima Online when I played it, I had everything. But you know what? It didn't mean anything. Honestly, it didn't even exist except for magnetic bytes on a computer somewhere. There was never any physical thing there for me. At least he had that. But even he was like, it doesn't mean anything. Everything that you pursue in life is a chasing after the wind, meaning it's pointless. If anybody wants to today, go chase the wind and see where that gets you. Out of breath. You're not going to accomplish anything. You won't have anything in the end. Everything is pointless. Everything under the sun is pointless. And I kind of add in the scripture because he never does say the other aspect of it, which is the things that are over the sun are not pointless. That's what I get from Ecclesiastes. What does that mean? Things that are eternal. Guess what? You and I, we're eternal. Our relationships should be a priority because we're eternal. And it's one of the sad things today in families because, the youth were studying it this morning. How often are you on your screen? But it's not just youth. It's adults as well. Sometimes I sit around and kind of look around my house and, here we are, the family, and we're all together. And what are we doing? We're not connecting with each other, are we? We've got something here that's finite, that doesn't matter. It's a chasing after the wind. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but when the bulk of your day is spent in front of a screen and you're not connecting with other people, wow, you are chasing after the wind. It's pointless. Utterly meaningless. I asked my kids the other day, because they had spent the day playing video games and watching TV, and I was like, you guys ever have a day like this, and at the end of the day, you almost feel kind of depressed because you haven't actually accomplished anything? I'm not against screens. I'm not against watching movies. Obviously, my family will tell you that. I love that stuff too. But at the end of the day, if there's not something I did constructive during the day, and it doesn't even have to be work, but it's something that I've accomplished, I kind of get this sense of it's a day wasted. I just kind of spent a day doing nothing. If you need rest, sometimes that's handy. But if it's not a day of rest and you just got lazy and didn't do anything, and of course I was kind of sad because my kids are like, no, Dad, we love it. Yeah, they're kids. Their ethics and their priorities will probably change as they get older. But Think about a time, maybe in your life, where you felt like you had no options. You had no choice. Your priority was set for you. I've been there. There are times it does feel like that. We need to recognize that's never the case. One of the priorities that I often feel like I'm stuck with is earning money. I have to earn money so that we can pay our bills. And we do. I don't have a choice. Right? I go do office administration, which is not my passion. And I have to do that 40 hours a week, and I don't get to be with my wife, and I don't get to be with my kids. And I'm just kind of stuck, right? I'm in bondage. I have to. I have no choice because I have to be able to pay my bills. The truth of the matter, that's my choice. I like having our house. And because I like having our house and providing that for my wife and kids, it's necessary that I have a job and I earn money to be able to support those things. And I need to recognize that that time at work is not a waste of time. It's not a waste of day because I do have eternal connections with other people in that place. I could certainly not do that anymore. Did you know that? I have the freedom. I could call my boss right now and start paperwork tomorrow because there's nobody there today and quit my job. I could do that. I could. There is nothing stopping me from doing that. There is nobody standing in my way. She couldn't stop me. She could fuss, she could scream, she could cry. She couldn't stop me from doing it. Nobody could stop me from doing that. It's my choice. So it's time I stop acting or feeling like I'm a victim, right? You guys hear me on this? There's always a choice. Now, the option is not something I would pick because excuse me, in our American culture, we are in a consumerist culture, and you've got to pay your rent and your mortgage and your utility. You've got these expenses if you want to live in the culture that we have here. Our alternative would be really to become homeless or to basically subside off of other people. I think it's the dial on that side. There's two dials. I believe it's one on that side. I don't want to do that. I would rather have a job and pay my bills. But I'm picking that priority. Do you guys hear what I'm saying? My point is I'm not a victim, and you're not either. We have a choice. It's not much of a choice. It's not a choice. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer choice for us. I mean, we don't want to be homeless. We like having a house. We like having stuff, so it's necessary for me to work. So that's what I choose. A lot of times as a pastor, I have people that come to me for counseling. Frequently, I'll get a spouse, a husband or a wife that comes to me, and they want to tell me about the evils of their spouse. I'm very cautious with that. I mean, I don't really take what people say as gospel. I take it as their perspective and their experience. You know, and if somebody is hurt and feels offended because they have a spouse that did something, then I understand that they're hurt and offended because they believe their spouse did this thing. And so, you know, I tend to try to be open-minded, you know, because I have to be. Often these spouses, I know the other spouse, and I hope for an opportunity to minister to them. And I don't want to get triangulated to one side or the other, but I would like to be there to help. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll talk to the person and say, well, you know, the spouse isn't here. So there's really nothing we can do with them. And honestly, you can't control them anyway. I mean, they have to make their own choices. The only person that you have control over is you. So let's talk about you. You're in a difficult circumstance, and I understand that. What are your options? What can you do? And my hope is to empower that person, because really their area of control is their own attitude, their own feelings, their own options, their own choices, their own actions. That is the area that they have control. And so I want to empower them in that, and let's talk about what your options are and what things you can do. Now that doesn't usually go over very well, because most of the time they see the other person as the villain, the other person is the problem, and there's absolutely nothing I can do. They're just a victim. I'm not using, when I use that term victim, I'm not talking about a literal victim. I mean, there are people in abusive relationships. There are, you know, spouses that are physically hurting, and in that situation, really, you've got to get out. That's just a bad situation. What I'm talking is self-imposed victims. And this is where the negative fantasies come in. Well, my spouse, he won't put his laundry away. And it just makes a mess everywhere. Okay, well, maybe, what could you do? Maybe you could put it in a basket. Well, I can't do that because then he'll just dump the basket somewhere. Well, what if you put the basket in his closet? Well, I can't do that because he doesn't like it when I put it in the closet. Well, then what if you, fold his clothes? Well, then he'll get angry at me because he doesn't like the way that I fold them. Well, what if I can't do that because of he. Well, I can't do that because of he. Now that is what they call in counseling and psychology, those are called negative fantasies. Negative fantasies, because you're automatically interpreting or predicting something that is going to happen, usually based off of your view of their attitudes or experiences that you've had in the past with them. As a husband, I screw up a lot. Ask my wife. I say things I shouldn't say. I'm disrespectful, and I strive not to do those things, but there are still times when I'm stressed out or I'm upset about something and she comes in and says the wrong thing and I follow and say the wrong thing, or maybe I just come stressed out and the kids are irritating me, and who knows? There are still times that I fail, but for her to have a negative fantasy of, I can't talk to him because if I do, he's going to say something. Well, that's not necessarily true. Now, if you pick a time where I'm really stressed out, or maybe, hopefully not, I'm trying not to do that. That's something that I'm working on. But to just say that I always do that thing because it happened before, that's a negative fantasy. You don't know that. You don't know that until you do it. And whenever I'm talking to people who are basically self-induced victims, well, I can't do this because he. Well, I can't do this because she would say this. Well, try it. And if it doesn't work, try something else. And when we're looking at our priorities, oftentimes that's when we start feeling like we have to have these certain priorities because we don't have a choice. If I made this priority, there's a lot of husbands and wives that, kids are number one. Like mamas, ask mamas. Kids are always number one. Husband, he can fend for himself. He can figure it out. My kids are my number one priority. That's out of order. It really is. In a marriage relationship, your kids cannot come before your spouse. And I know that's tricky at times because you get your kind of typical overprotective mommy bear mama, and then you get the I will beat into them their submission fathers. That I understand. There are certainly contexts where mama bear is going to come out, but in the overall scheme of things, that is an out of order priority. Worse yet, God should be your number one priority. Seek first his kingdom, and everything else will be added unto you. That is making God your number one priority. So no more victims. Recognize that you have choices. The problem with the victim mentality that I've been talking about so much is nothing is your fault. Honestly, I know people who have victim mentality, and that's one of the biggest reasons they want to be a victim. Because if I'm a victim, then nothing is my fault. I made no mistakes because I'm a victim. I didn't actually do anything. I just suffer. So nothing is my fault. I don't know why being wrong is such a horrible thing. I'm with you. I don't like being wrong. It reminds me of a time I had a musician. She was a keyboard player, and couldn't hear her. And I kept bending over and turning her up because I had the soundboard right by me, and so I kept turning her up. And then I'd go a little more, and I'd be like, man, I still can't hear her. And I turned her up 2 or 3 times, and then one time when I was coming up, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her adjusting her volume down. I said, what are you doing? And she was kind of embarrassed because, I'd caught her. Because she was doing it. Every time I turned it up, she was turning herself down because she didn't want to be loud. So what are you doing? She goes, well, I'm just afraid I'll make a mistake. I said, then go home. If nobody can hear you, there's no point to you even being up here. Take your keyboard and go home. you're not doing me any good or them. And she went, oh, and turned it back up. And I'm like, yes, make your mistake boldly. I mean, honestly, I'm a big fan of apologizing for mistakes that I make. My wife will tell you that. Why? Because I don't like apologizing. It creates an accountability. It's a self-imposed accountability. Accept responsibility when you incur fault. Don't be so afraid of being wrong. I mean, I appreciate my kids because in general, not all the time, but in general, when I ask them, did you do this bad thing? They're like, yeah. And then I punish them and we move on. Because that's how it happens. When you do something you shouldn't do, own up to it, take the responsibility. If you got a punishment, deal with the punishment, and then move on and don't do it again. Jesus, with the woman caught in adultery, do you remember what he said to her at the end? I know you guys do. Somebody say it. What did he tell her? Go and sin no more. Go and sin no more. That was the famous scene where he's like, like he who is without sin cast the first stone, and all the people left. He asked the woman, he says, nobody left to condemn you? She said, nobody. Neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more. You made a mistake. You shouldn't have done that. Now go. Don't do it again. I mean, honestly, that is life. I got a few quotes for you about mistakes. Michael Jordan says, failure is the key. Wait, no, actually, I'm sorry. This is Morihei Ueshiba. Failure is the key to success. Each mistake teaches us something. I mean, if you look, that is like the whole concept of science. Any of you science nerds in here? It's the mistakes that get you to where you finally reach success. You can't get there without making mistakes. If you're going to turn your keyboard down, if you're so afraid of making mistakes you're not even going to try, then go home. I mean, if you're the person that you need to be a victim because you don't want to have any responsibility, then your priorities are going to be way out of whack, and you're going to struggle in life a lot. I like this one. Dennis Watley. He said, failure should be our teacher, not our undertaker. Failure is delay, not defeat. It is a temporary detour, not a dead end. Failure is something we can afford only by saying nothing. I'm sorry. Failure is something we can avoid only by saying nothing, doing nothing, and being nothing. So if you want to say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing, then yeah, you won't have to deal with failure. But I don't know about you, I'm not content with that. And this last quote is by Brian Willis. He's a really amazing guy. Something I say. The only true failure is not when we fail, but when we give up. The true secret to success is that we get up one more time than we're knocked down. That's it. You fail, you get knocked down, get up. I mean, really, you have not actually failed until you don't get up anymore. If you quit trying. If you're going to have a victim mentality and you're not going to choose your own priorities, you let other people pick them for you, you're not going to put forth the effort to try, okay, yeah, you failed. But if you do something and it doesn't work, pick yourself up. Try again. I'm a good father and I'm a good husband. I've even told you some ways today that I have failed, but I use those as opportunities to make myself better. That's why I'm a good father and a good husband. I'm not a good father and husband because I do things perfectly, because I don't. But because I pick myself up and I try to do better. I always tell people to do better today than you did yesterday and do better tomorrow than you did today. That's growth. If you do that, there's not much more that can be asked of you. Let's pray. Father, help us to keep you as our number one priority. Help us to always look to you first and foremost for all of our needs. Lord, I rebuke that mentality of the victim. I rebuke that sense that we don't have a choice. Father, empower us to understand the impact and the power that we have over our own lives and over those that are around us. And help us to use that power for good. Help us to be mindful, God, of the things that are finite, that are just a chasing after the wind, so that we can truly pursue and make priorities those things that are eternal. Lord, we desire to leave a legacy, to have an impact for good. Lord, we desire your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Help us, Lord, to always seek your kingdom first in all things. And all God's people said, amen. Well, I don't know what frog got in my throat, but he jacked me up today. Well, thank you guys for being here. I pray that God will bless you and meet you right where you are this week.